You know that specific kind of silence that fills a room right before someone leaves for the last time. It isn't the heavy, angry silence of an argument, and it isn't the comfortable silence of a long Sunday afternoon. It is a thin, fragile quiet, the kind that feels like it might shatter if you breathe too loudly. When you listen to All I Ask, it feels like Adele has stepped into that exact room, sat down on the edge of the bed, and decided to stay there with you in the stillness, acknowledging everything that is about to be lost. There is a unique weight to a goodbye that doesn't involve any shouting or accusations. We are often taught that the end of a relationship should be explosive, a series of slammed doors and harsh words that make it easier to walk away because you refueled by the heat of adrenaline. But the most painful endings are usually the ones that happen in the low light of a kitchen or a shared bedroom, where the only thing left to say is nothing at all. This song lives in that hollow space, and that is why it feels like an apology, even though the word sorry is never actually spoken. Sometimes a true apology isn't about admitting you were wrong. It's about acknowledging that something beautiful is ending, and you are powerless to stop the clock. You might recognize that feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff with someone you love, knowing you both have to jump in opposite directions. The apology is in the way you hold their hand for those last few seconds. It's a silent recognition of the time you spent together, a way of saying, I am so sorry that our love wasn't enough to keep the world from changing. In this specific moment of ending, there is no room for blame or the tallying of old debts. When you finally realize a relationship has reached its natural conclusion, the you did what and who said what suddenly feel incredibly small and insignificant. The song moves past the wreckage and focuses entirely on the fleeting present. It's a plea for a temporary peace treaty, a request to put down the weapons of resentment just long enough to look each other in the eye and remember why you were there in the first place. The request for one last night isn't really about trying to fix what has broken or finding a way back. By the time this song begins, the characters in the story have already accepted that the fix isn't coming and the doors are already locked. They know the sun is going to rise and they will be strangers. This request is actually an act of deep mercy. It has a way of saying that the ending doesn't have to be the only thing we remember. It has an apology for the future you're about to lose offered in the form of one final honest memory. You may have noticed that when we are younger, we tend to grieve through noise and chaos. We want the world to know we're hurting. We want to scream at the unfairness of it all until we're hollow. But as we grow older, our grief becomes more restrained, more inward. We learn that there is a certain quiet dignity in an ending that is handled with care. There is a profound self-respect in choosing to walk away without making a scene, and All I Ask captures that adult transition perfectly. It is the sound of someone who has done the screaming already and is now just tired and very, very honest. The intimacy of the song comes from its absolute lack of production and artifice. It's just a voice and a piano, which mirrors the way we feel when everything else is stripped away during a crisis. When you're losing someone, you don't care about the outside world, your career, or your long-term plans. All of that fades into a blur in the background. You are reduced to the most basic raw version of yourself, a person who loves someone they can no longer keep, standing in the middle of a life that is currently changing shape. Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized that you're already looking at a ghost of what you once were? You're still in the same room, but the us part of the equation has already vanished into the past. That realization is a heavy, suffocating burden to carry alone. This song feels like an apology because it shares that burden with the listener. It's an admission of a shared tragedy, a way of telling the other person, I see the end coming too, and I'm sorry that I am the one who has to be the witness to your departure. Choosing dignity over desperation is one of the hardest things a human being can do when their heart is breaking. Our natural instinct when we're losing something is to grab it tighter, to beg, to negotiate, or to promise things we know we can't possibly keep. But there is a point where you realize that begging only devalues the love you once had. By asking for all I ask, you aren't asking for a second chance. You are asking for the relationship to be honored, for the final chapter to be written with the same care and tenderness as the first one. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from knowing you will never be this physically or emotionally close to this person again. You start instinctively memorizing things, the way the light hits their face, the specific cadence of their breath, the way their hand feels in yours. It's a desperate, quiet attempt to create a mental photograph that won't fade when the months pass. The song feels like that slow process of archiving a person. It's an apology for the fact that eventually these details will start to blur, and this is the last time they will be truly sharp and real. Often, we do and say the words, "I'm sorry," because they feel far too small for the magnitude of the loss we are experiencing. If you've spent years building a life and a language with someone, a simple apology for it ending feels almost like an insult. So, instead of words, you offer your presence. You offer a night where you don't fight, where you don't talk about the lawyers or the moving trucks or the shared friends. You offer a night that exists outside of time. That gift of presence is the loudest, most meaningful apology there is. The concept of losing a future is something that many of us have had to face in the quietest hours of the night. It's not just the person you miss. It's the person you are going to become with them by your side. It's the trips you hadn't taken yet, the house you hadn't bought, the version of you that only existed when you were reflected in their eyes. When Adele sings, she is mourning that version of herself as much as the relationship. It is a self-apology, a way of saying goodbye to the future you thought you were entitled to inhabit. There is a gentleness in this song that is often missing from contemporary breakup anthems. It is not about "I will survive," or "I'm better off without you," or finding someone new to fill the gap. It's about the simple, devastating truth. I loved you, and this hurts. There is so much power in that kind of vulnerability. It takes an incredible amount of strength to admit that you re-hurting without trying to make the other person feel guilty for it. That lack of guilt is what makes the song feel so pure, as an apology for the pain, but not a weaponization of it. We often think of closure as something we get from a long, complicated conversation or a final, logical explanation. But real closure usually comes from a place of exhausted acceptance. It is the moment you finally stop asking why and start acknowledging what is. The song feels like the exact second that shift happens in the human heart. It's the transition from fighting the current to letting it carry you away into the unknown. It's an apology for the struggle, a way of saying, "I'm done fighting the truth now. Let's just be here while we still can." You know the feeling of wanting to be remembered well by someone who is leaving your life. You don't want your legacy in their mind to be the fight you had last Tuesday. You want it to be the way you made them feel when things were good and the world felt small. By asking for one last honest moment, the narrator is trying to protect the legacy of the love they shared. It's an apology for the bad times and the misunderstandings, an attempt to make sure the last frame of the movie is a beautiful one that stays with them. In our younger years, we might have stayed in a failing relationship out of a terrifying fear of being alone. But as we mature, we learn that being alone is often a more honest path than being with someone and feeling lonely. However, that maturity doesn't make the parting any easier to bear. It just makes it more solemn. The song reflects that growth, the understanding that leaving is the right thing to do, but that right and painless are two very different things that rarely meet. Restraint can often feel much heavier and more taxing than anger. Anger is a release, a fire that burns off the energy of a broken heart. Restraint is the act of holding that energy inside so you don't accidentally burn the other person. When the vocals in the song swell, it feels like that bottled energy is trying to escape, but it's always pulled back into the melody. That tension is the sound of someone trying to stay composed for the sake of the person they're relieving. It's a beautiful, agonizing form of respect that says, I will hold this pain so you don't have to. There is a deep, resonant sadness in realizing that someone you know everything about is about to become a stranger again. You know their coffee order, their childhood fears, and the way they look when they first wake up in the morning. And tomorrow, none of that knowledge will belong to you anymore. The song is a way of saying, I'm sorry, I have to let go of all these things I know about you. It is a final inventory of a shared soul before the lights go out and the records are sealed. Loving someone without asking for a future is perhaps the most selfless and difficult form of love. It's love in its most distilled, basic form, no expectations, no demands, and no promises of forever. It's just, I love you right now in this single square inch of time. That kind of radical honesty is rare, and it's why the song resonates so deeply with anyone who has been there. It's an apology for all the times we loved with conditions, offered at a moment when conditions no longer matter. Sometimes we stay in the room just a few minutes longer than we should because we aren't ready for the after to start. We know that as soon as we walk out that door, the world will look fundamentally different. The colors will be a little flatter, the air a little colder, and the silence a little louder. The request for all I ask is a way of delaying the inevitable, not out of denial, but out of a human need to brace ourselves. It's an apology to ourselves for the coldness that is coming, a final moment of warmth before the winter. The silence that follows the final note of the song is just as important as the music itself. It's the sound of the door finally closing and the latch clicking into place. It is the sound of the air returning to the room and the world starting to move again. It's the moment where the apology is finished and the life after begins. You're left with the feeling that, although it's over, it was handled with a grace that most people never find. And maybe, in the end, grace is the only thing we can really give each other. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid endings, trying to prolong things, to fix things, and to look the other way when things start to crumble. But there is a certain kind of peace that only comes when you finally stop running and turn to face the end. This song is the sound of that peace. It's not a happy peace, and it isn't a resolution, but it is a real one. It's the peace of someone who has said everything they need to say through their presence, without having to find the words. You might find that you go back to this song not when you're angry, but when you're in a period of deep reflection. You go back to it when you need to feel understood in your own quiet goodbyes. It serves as a reminder that your pain doesn't have to be loud to be valid. Your apology doesn't have to be verbal to be heard by the heart. Your ending doesn't have to be a failure just because it didn't last forever. Sometimes the ending is the most honest part of the whole story. As the years go by, the people we've loved and lost become a permanent part of our internal landscape. We carry the apologies we never said and the ones we never received like smooth stones in our pockets. We carry the one last nights and the what-ifs as we move through new lives. This song gives those feelings a place to live for 4 minutes and 48 seconds. It validates the quiet grief of the adult heart, the one that knows how to say goodbye with a steady hand even when the heart is heavy. There is a finality in the way the song ends that feels like a quiet benediction over a shared history. It doesn't fade out into the distance. It simply stops. It's a period at the end of a long, complicated sentence that took years to write. It is the final "I'm sorry" that hangs in the air long after the person has left the room and the car has driven away. It's the realization that while you can't change the ending of the story, you can absolutely choose the way you meet it. You are left with the sense that love, even when it ends, is never a waste of time or energy. The apology inherent in the music isn't for the love itself, but for the human limitation that prevents it from staying forever. It's a tribute to the beauty of the attempt. It's a way of saying that even if this one night is all we get, it was enough to make the journey worth it. It's an apology to the universe for not being able to hold on to something so bright, but a thank you for getting to hold it at all. This song is for the moments we don't post about, the ones that don't make it into the stories we tell others. It's for the quiet realization that the person across from you is no longer your person, and the gentle way you choose to let them go. It's for the apology that lives in a look, a touch, or a shared song. It's the recognition that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to say nothing at all and just be there until the light fades out. A question for you. Think back to a time when you knew with absolute certainty that you were experiencing the last time with someone you loved. In that moment, when the words were too heavy to speak, what was the unspoken apology you were carrying in your heart? And did you find a way to let them feel it before you walked away?